Good evening, my friends. I have a story to tell that is obviously about a sensitive topic, so I'm going to start with something very not serious. And I also have a question for those watching this for feedback for a possible topic, different topic. So, fun topic because my hair is actually an ice cream cone. Look at that. Look at that. So, ladies, if you have been trying to grow your hair out and it's not working, give it time. I have spent 3 or 4 years trying to grow my hair out because when I was 5, I wanted my hair down to my butt. And I don't know why, but I just didn't think it was an option. And then I realized at some point in recovery that, of course, it's an option. Like, of course I can do that. But then, then I had to get my hormones working. So it's possible. It happens. And I just think that's hilarious because it looks really bizarre. And then the question I have is, it's come up. It was it's for those of us in this journey who have a pretty strong spiritual connection or relationship to God, there can be a lot of rupture and repair in that relationship over the course of this journey. It can be a pretty intense aspect of this whole thing. And I've experienced that a number of times in different ways and had to really consciously work on healing that very intentionally, several different points in several different ways. And if you guys would like more, like a video just on that, if you think that would be helpful, let me know what angle or what kind of information or what approach, like the process of doing it or just reassurance or kind of what you'd want to hear about that. So to get to the meat of this story, this is a story about the benefits of suicidal ideation. Another short note, I will be making more content about shadow work in the upcoming months because it's one of the things I'm most passionate about, honestly, in this life, is shadow work. Finding the goodness and the beauty and the usefulness and the humanity and the very, very dark parts of life. Most of my journey involves a lot of that, and it's something I haven't even breached here because I usually try to keep things light, but I believe you all deserve to know the truth of, what can be included. Again, like I said in my note of transparency, you deserve the truth and you deserve to understand and know how to alchemize your experience and what that means and the information you need to really succeed. And shadow work is a really big part of that. So this definitely falls in that category. So one of my biggest life hacks to start this out is whenever you're faced with a decision, whenever you feel incredibly stuck, I really encourage you to sit down if you have a fork in the road. And this is a suicidal ideation. Like if you're really getting to the point where that feels like this is what I should do, sitting down where you are, instead of standing at the fork in the road and feeling like you need to make a decision. And one of the things I learned from coaching is that a lot of folks have a lot of fear around suicidal ideation, which I had it for a long time. And it never really scared me. So that was an interesting thing. I think current mental health community has created a lot of fear and urgency and like a big stigma around it. And it's actually quite normal. Like just freeze response straight up can do that pretty much by itself. And there's just so many, unmet need for regulation, social isolation, touch deprivation, like so many basic things can create suicidal ideation. It's really not, it's very common and not a big deal in my mind at all. It's a very normal part of going through any process like this. But I encourage you when you hit that fork in the road to sit your butt down and look at that option. This is something, and again, this isn't just for this, for any situation where you're facing something really hard, take a good long look at the option that you shouldn't choose. Consider what that would require. Consider the consequences. Consider everything. Consider all of the aspects you can think of. Not from a place of victimhood or desperation, but like logically, like sit down and think about it. From a place of like, okay, and the goal here, and again, this isn't exclusive to suicidal ideation, but the goal is to give a different backdrop to the current choice you're making. Because if you are simply looking at your options in life from a place of I have to choose the right thing, you're never going to have accurate context for your decision. You have free will. You don't have to anything ever. You do not have to stay on this planet. Technically, no one can keep you here if you don't want to be here. It's impossible on a level. It really is. So no matter what's happening in your life, there is a level of agency you always will have. And that's often highlighted by this particular pattern. So to dive into more of the story, I started having this phenomenon happen when I was about 13. That was when I had, well, I mean, maybe one of my mini perfect storms. I had a lot of those. But yeah, it was when I was 13. That was when that started. And it was on and off and pretty intense for a lot of my life, it was usually tied into seasonal affective disorder. And it would cycle in and out. And then, my journey was very intense. You've had a trigger warning. I won't go into super details, but it was, I didn't have a lot of options for most of the time. And I have found that this particular, sitting with this and letting it shine a light on, when I really sat down seriously, there was one particular point where I had no options left. It was a very, very dark point. And to go back to the God thing, I remember sitting in the shed I was living in at the time, and I was swamped in complex PTSD and had no idea. I had exhausted every attempt I could, and I was stuck in what I didn't know was a narcissistic abusive situation, and it was just a mess, and I'd already recovered, but it didn't really matter. That was part of it. At that point, I was like, well, I've tried everything. I really don't even know what to do at this point. I've lost everything. I didn't have my kids. I didn't have money. I didn't have independence. At that point, I was still very mired in trauma. From that point, I didn't really have a lot of function. It was a bad spot. I remember sitting on the edge of this kind of abyss and just really being like, all right, maybe that's the only way. I need this to end. I can't persist. I've given it everything I've got. I don't have anything left. And I remember at that moment in time, feeling like God was just sitting next to me. He was behind my left shoulder. Sounds ridiculous, but just kind of like, well, if you stayed, what do you want to create? What do you want? That was the only message I got at that moment, was what do you want? You can have anything. It's up to you. What do you want to create? What do you want to do? That was it. And I was so shocked because I think the religious culture I grew up in would judge a person in that situation. And instead I was met with a loving presence that was like, I'm here to help and to co-create with you. And I want to know what your heart desires. That's all I want. I don't care what you choose. I just want to know your heart. And in that moment, I was able to see how I had nothing left to lose. I had already lost everything, and multiple times over. I'd already had a relapse. I had a re-injury and 3 relapses at this point. There was nothing left to lose. I didn't have people. I had nothing. I didn't have anything. I had no people, no function, no money, no independence, nothing. I was just in a shed with nothing except a lot of trauma running through my brain and body. And I made a decision at that point that life would be a grand experiment. There was nothing left to hang my hat on other than I just want to see, either way, I'm going to end up at this point, at the door of death. It's going to happen by itself at some point. And I can at least find out, I want to see what I can do if I don't give up. I want to see what I can accomplish if I just don't give up. It was just an experiment, just find out, what can I, and I could always come back, it's well, the door's open, I can always come back to this option. It's never going to really leave. And every time I've come back, which is more times than I would care to count, it's just shined a light on, okay, what am I not looking at? What am I not seeing? Do I need to die, or do I need to take a vacation? Do I need to stop fawning and caring what people think about my choices? They don't know that the choice is whatever the thing is, or death. They don't know that, but I do. I know that. I don't need them to understand. And it's shed so much light because so often when I come back to that, it's been this incredibly enlightening, shining a light on all the things I could be doing that I'm just not, because it sounds like too much work, or it seems socially unacceptable, or like, I don't know how to do that because I have kids, or what about the money, or like all these practical things. It's like, okay, but that versus death, I'm like, come on, Christina, you can do that. That's easier than this option. It's much more complicated and difficult, way more difficult to go that way. And I found that incredibly helpful, to just give myself permission to sit with that when needed. And let it shine a light, let it give a context to the other options, you know? Because there's a lot of options that look very extreme until you compare them to that. And then you're like, well, that's really not that extreme. Not at all. Really, that's actually pretty mild. That's some very mild salsa right there. That is not a big deal. So all of that to say, there is meaning in this experience. There is a lot that you can only find in this dark place. It's not something to be afraid of. It's something that's here to teach you. And, you know, and your experience may not be mine, but there can be benefit to, you can alchemize that pattern. You can use it to your benefit. You can take what's happening and make it a floodlight. So that's your invitation if you're there. And also to just know that there's nothing to be afraid of with this. Like it's really common, like so common. It's not a big deal. It's very easy in our culture these days with the lack of connection to nature and to each other and to uplifting, regulating activities that we have. Very easy to not have your regulatory needs met and be in that place. So that's my story for tonight. I love you guys, and I hope this gives you whatever it's meant to.